Have you ever wondered why, of all people, you ended up in the crosshairs of a narcissist's life? Was it bad luck, some karmic punishment, or a cruel twist of fate? No, it was none of those things. God doesn't waste time with accidents. You were placed there with purpose, raw, divine, burning purpose. And maybe you're thinking, but why me? Well, what if the answer isn't about you suffering, but about you waking up? Maybe that fire wasn't sent to destroy you, but to forge something unbreakable in you. See, Act 1 is survival. You didn't crumble. You're still breathing. Act 2 is revelation, the moment you realize the pain wasn't pointless. But the real twist? Act 3 is transformation, when the very person who tried to crush you becomes the reason you rise. Ever seen a narcissist lose control? It's like watching a toddler drop an iPhone, chaotic, loud, and oddly satisfying. Stick with me, because what you'll hear next will change how you see every scar and every silence they ever left you with. You were chosen to mirror their truth, not absorb their toxicity. That's a statement that cuts deeper than most people realize, because it speaks to the silent war many have fought in the shadows of a narcissist's world. When you find yourself entangled in the life of a narcissist, it can feel like being caught in a whirlwind of manipulation, blame shifting, and emotional confusion. You question your worth, your sanity, your decisions. But what if you were never meant to carry their poison? What if your role wasn't to be broken by their chaos, but to reflect something back to them they've spent a lifetime avoiding? Narcissists are master illusionists. They craft stories about themselves so carefully, so convincingly, that even they start to believe the lies. They build fortresses of arrogance to hide a fragile core of insecurity. But here's the part no one tells you. When someone like you, a person with empathy, depth, integrity, enters their life, it's like holding up a mirror to their mask. You didn't come to bow down to their delusions. You came to reflect truth, not through confrontation or conflict, but through simply being what they cannot be, authentic. Your kindness exposes their manipulation. Your patience reveals their impatience. Your emotional intelligence highlights their immaturity. And without even trying, you become the one thing they fear most: evidence. Narcissists crave control because control keeps their false self intact. But when someone walks in with strength disguised as softness, their grip starts to falter. You become a mirror, not because you intend to, but because your light naturally casts shadows in their carefully lit stage. They start to resent you, not because of who you are, but because of what you reflect. You don't absorb their toxicity. You hold space for their truth to be revealed. And that's not an easy role. It's painful, it's thankless, it's confusing, but it is divinely purposeful. You see, people often mistake suffering as weakness, but enduring the presence of a narcissist without losing your soul takes a strength that can't be taught in books or therapy sessions. It's the kind of strength that's carved out in silence, in long nights of self-doubt, in choosing compassion over retaliation, and in learning to say no without guilt. Narcissists project their wounds onto others to avoid facing them. But you didn't absorb their darkness. You reflected it. You didn't become like them. You stayed you. That's power. Think of it like this: a mirror doesn't change its reflection to please the viewer. It doesn't bend or distort. It just reflects honestly and clearly. That's what you were brought into their life to do. You weren't meant to argue with their fantasy. You were meant to show them reality. But here's the twist. They don't always thank you for it. In fact, they might punish you for it, reject you, smear you, call you names, and twist the narrative to make you look like the villain. That's part of the process. Because when truth walks into a room built on lies, things don't break quietly. Still, there's a sacredness to your role, because not everyone is chosen to be that mirror. Not everyone can stand in the face of manipulation and still choose empathy over ego. Not everyone can be misunderstood and still stand firm in their truth. You didn't absorb their toxicity because you were never meant to carry their emotional weight. You were placed in their life to show them a path out of their own darkness, even if they never choose to walk it. Sometimes the reason you're placed in a narcissist's life isn't to fix them or heal them or even love them in the way they demanded, but to remind them, even if only for a moment, of what authenticity looks like. You may have felt discarded, devalued, or erased, but that doesn't mean you failed. In fact, it might mean you fulfilled your purpose, because a mirror doesn't apologize for showing the truth. It just stands, silent, steady, honest. And while they may walk away pretending you meant nothing, Somewhere deep inside, the reflection you offered them lingers. It unsettles them. It whispers questions they're not ready to face. That's how transformation begins, not with comfort, but with confrontation. Not loud, aggressive confrontation, but the kind that happens when someone sees who they really are, perhaps for the first time, and is forced to sit with it. You were the invitation to that moment. You were the mirror. Your presence was meant to trigger their chance for change. That's not a poetic idea. It's a profound and sometimes painful reality. When you walk into a narcissist's life, you don't just become another character in their story, you become a disruption, a pattern breaker, a force that threatens to expose the very illusions they've built to protect themselves from truth. Your presence isn't passive, it challenges their internal architecture. You were never just someone they met. You were a divine interruption, an opportunity, a mirror, a potential turning point in their rigid, self-centered narrative. Narcissists live in carefully controlled emotional environments. Their worlds are designed to shield them from accountability, from vulnerability, from the emotional exposure that real growth demands. But then someone like you comes in, someone who offers unconditional love, deep empathy, honesty, and genuine connection, and that shakes the foundation. Because deep down, beneath all the manipulation, bravado, and ego, there's a scared, wounded self that knows it needs healing. It's buried, but it's there. And your presence, with all its sincerity and emotional maturity, awakens that part, however briefly. You might have noticed it in moments. The hesitation in their anger, the flicker of remorse, the silent pause when you offered grace instead of retaliation. Those small cracks in their armor weren't accidents. They were signs of impact. You were meant to stir something in them, not to be their savior, but to be the spark, the wake-up call, the voice of possibility that whispers, "You don't have to live this way. Your love wasn't a weakness, it was an alarm clock." And even if they tried to silence it, that sound echoes long after you're gone. Of course, change isn't guaranteed. That's the hardest truth to accept. Just because your presence offered them a chance doesn't mean they'll take it. Sometimes they reject it violently. Sometimes they punish you for it, because change demands humility. And humility is the one thing the narcissistic mind resists with every fiber of its being. It means admitting that their way of living, controlling, deceiving, deflecting, has caused pain not just to others, but to themselves. And that's a terrifying realization. Still, the opportunity was there. You offered it. Through your compassion, your consistency, your refusal to play their games. Think about how many people came before you and reinforced their behavior, feeding their ego, enabling their lies, tiptoeing around their moods. But you didn't, not fully. Even if you tried at times, your soul couldn't lie to keep them comfortable. You challenged them with your truth, your expectations, your refusal to settle for emotional scraps. You expected growth, honesty, and mutual respect. And in doing so, you disrupted their cycle. That disruption may have been met with rage, withdrawal, or manipulation, but it was still a disruption, and that matters. Narcissists aren't beyond change, despite what many believe, but the journey is excruciating for them because it demands the very thing they fear most: vulnerability. Your presence, when grounded and self-aware, becomes an invitation to confront that fear. You represented a different way of relating. You showed what love without strings looks like, what accountability without shame feels like, what boundaries without rejection mean. And for someone who's built their identity on control and performance, that kind of authenticity is revolutionary. It's important to understand that your impact isn't measured by how they treated you in the end. It's measured by what was stirred within them when they encountered you. Growth rarely looks graceful. Sometimes it looks like resistance, sabotage, or denial. But even in that chaos, seeds are planted. You may never see them bloom, and that's okay, because your role wasn't to harvest, but to sow, to break the soil, to awaken a possibility that they've never had the courage to face. You may have walked away wondering if you were enough, if your love failed, if your boundaries ruined things. But the truth is, your presence was an answer to a deeper call in their life, one they may not have even recognized. You weren't just a partner, friend, or family member. You were a mirror and a messenger. You were their chance to rise above their patterns. You were the moment they could have chosen transformation over stagnation, truth over illusion. And even if they didn't choose it, the offer was made through you. The experience was a divine lesson in boundaries, not punishment. It didn't happen to destroy you, even if it felt like that at times. It didn't unfold to humiliate you, break you, or convince you that love is a battlefield of pain. It was designed, deliberately, painfully, precisely, to teach you what no one else could, to reveal the places in your life where you were wide open, unguarded, giving beyond your limits, and believing that self-sacrifice was the price of being loved. You weren't cursed by the encounter. You were called to learn where your yes was too easy, where your no had been silenced, and where your worth had been compromised in the name of keeping the peace. Narcissists don't understand boundaries. They see them as obstacles, insults, or rejections. So when someone like you, who was likely raised to accommodate, to please, to fix, enters their orbit, your blurred lines become their playground. They test, they push, they take. And you perhaps in the beginning think that love means staying, understanding, proving your value. You excuse the gaslighting, rationalize the cruelty, tolerate the shifting rules. But somewhere in the ache of it all, a question begins to form. What about me? That moment is not weakness. It is sacred. It is the divine whisper that pulls you out of the fog and calls you back home to yourself. What you endured wasn't punishment for being kind or trusting. It was a curriculum, a deeply personal, spiritually precise curriculum tailored to show you that love must begin within. You weren't meant to become bitter, but to become wise. To see that protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's survival. To learn that your time, your body, your emotions, your presence are not up for negotiation. And that giving those gifts to someone who weaponizes them against you is not loyalty, it's self-abandonment. The narcissist was the vessel, the pressure, the mirror, but the lesson, oh, the lesson was always about your growth. There were likely times when you felt trapped in confusion, caught between love and pain, loyalty and self-respect. That's because your spirit was undergoing surgery. Boundaries don't come naturally to those who were raised to be agreeable. They come through fire, through saying enough when your heart still wants to say, I'll try harder, through choosing distance when your soul still aches for closeness, through realizing that loving someone doesn't mean saving them, especially when saving them means losing yourself. You were never being punished by God. You were being pulled into a deeper knowing, a higher version of yourself, one that no longer tolerates emotional erosion disguised as devotion. Every insult you endured, every manipulation you unraveled, every tear you cried in secret became the raw material for your awakening. Your nervous system learned to detect what once felt familiar but toxic. Your intuition sharpened, your sense of self deepened. You learned through deep necessity the difference between connection and enmeshment, between compassion and codependence. This kind of transformation doesn't come through ease, it comes through contrast, through first allowing yourself to be stretched too thin, then finally reclaiming space. It comes when the pain of being invisible becomes louder than the fear of being alone. It comes when you stop seeking permission to take up space. And yes, it hurts. It hurts to realize that someone you loved deeply wasn't capable of honoring your boundaries. But even in that heartbreak, there was a rebirth. The old you, the one who tolerated the bare minimum, who made excuses, who carried the emotional labor, was being burned away, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Think back to who you were before the encounter. Think about how you gave, how you bent, how you believed that love meant endurance. Now look at you. Raw, maybe, but awake. More discerning, less available to chaos. More in tune with your limits, your needs, your sacred worth. That's not the result of punishment. That's the result of divine refinement. God didn't place you in that situation to shame you, but to shape you, to teach you how to hold the line, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. You didn't fail by falling for a narcissist. You didn't lose because you loved someone who couldn't love you back in a healthy way. You were chosen for that experience because your soul was ready to evolve, ready to trade pleasing for peace, ready to stop negotiating your boundaries for breadcrumbs of affection. The narcissist wasn't your ending. They were the lesson you needed to walk into your beginning. Not so you'd live in fear, but so you'd rise with clarity. So you'd learn the sacred, non-negotiable truth. Love doesn't demand the death of self. It requires the birth of boundaries. You are the catalyst, not the casualty, of their transformation. It may not feel that way at first. When you walk away from the wreckage of a relationship with a narcissist, it's easy to look at yourself as the broken one, the one left behind, discarded, misunderstood, drained. You replay every word, every moment, every silent treatment and manipulation, wondering what you did wrong, how you ended up in a story that felt more like survival than love. But the truth is far more powerful than the pain. Your role was never to be destroyed. It was to disrupt, to awaken, to serve as a turning point in a story that had been stuck on repeat for far too long. Narcissists are creatures of habit. They thrive in patterns where they hold control, where others bend, where truth is twisted and emotions are used as weapons. Their world is curated to maintain a fragile identity propped up by validation, admiration, and power. But then you entered the picture, not to play the role they expected, but to unknowingly alter the script. You brought something different, not compliance, but depth, not flattery, but truth. Not submission, but strength wrapped in empathy. That was never a threat to them. It was a revelation, and like most revelations, it was uncomfortable. Being the catalyst means you were the moment in their life where old strategies stopped working. The emotional games, the guilt trips, the silent punishments, all began to lose their grip when met with your clarity. You questioned things others accepted. You held emotional ground when others wavered. You loved with honesty, not obligation. Whether you realized it or not, you became the contrast they never expected but desperately needed. You didn't just fit into their world, you shook it. And yes, they may have fought back, they may have pushed harder, manipulated deeper, or even tried to break your spirit to regain control, but all of that was proof of your impact. A catalyst is not always welcomed. Change rarely is. When a system has operated on dysfunction for years, the presence of truth doesn't feel healing. It feels threatening. But that doesn't make the truth any less necessary. You were a divine interruption in a loop of self-deception. Your presence exposed the gap between who they pretended to be and who they truly were. And even if they couldn't articulate it, even if they never thanked you or acknowledged the shift, you triggered something. A crack in their illusion. A glimpse of what real connection could feel like. A moment, however brief, where the mask slipped and the person underneath was forced to feel. You were never powerless in the dynamic. In fact, your presence alone held a power they couldn't control, and that terrified them, not because you were dangerous, but because you were authentic. Authenticity is the natural enemy of narcissism. It can't be manipulated, it can't be controlled, and it shines light into places that were meant to stay hidden. That light wasn't punishment, it was invitation. An invitation to grow, to face themselves, to change. You didn't come to destroy them, you came to give them a chance. Whether they took that chance is not your burden to carry. What matters is that the opportunity was real, and it came through you. Even if they chose denial over growth, silence over truth, and control over connection, that doesn't diminish your role. The impact of a catalyst doesn't require applause. It requires presence, integrity, and courage. You walked into a battlefield with no armor but your heart, and that was enough to shift the energy, to make them question, if only for a moment, the person they've become and the life they're living. And when the time came to walk away, you didn't leave as a victim, you left as the lesson. You may bear emotional scars, but those scars are proof of your courage, not your failure. You stayed true to your values in a place designed to make you forget them. You loved without losing yourself completely. You left before you were completely erased. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And now, as you look back, remember that your presence was never meant to be absorbed into their dysfunction. It was meant to stand apart, to challenge, to confront, to be the moment they might remember years from now when their world feels hollow and their charm no longer works. When they finally sit in silence and face the truth, they'll remember you, not as the casualty of their ego, but as the catalyst who brought light into their darkness, even if they couldn't handle it.